Presented exclusively by Mother's Polish.
Welcome back to another edition of the Slipstream Podcast. This is your host, Brady, and joining me for this episode, as always, we have Matthew, Austin, and the man, the myth, the legend, Cole Trickle Jr. First question tonight. Cole, how's your dad?
He's great. He's out there doing things still. He's filming movies and making a name for himself. He's just keeping the Trickle name alive, you know? So I'm just trying to follow in his footsteps, but in sim racing.
Yeah, for those who haven't caught on yet, Cole Trickle Jr. is actually the son of Cole Trickle from Days of Thunder.
Robin's Racing.
So, a little fun fact for the podcast fans out there. So, glad to see he's doing well. So, for this week's episode, we're going to continue our Formula One 101 series, as well as discuss a little bit of the news that's happening in the world of Formula One. Sort of as a reminder, this 101 series is really designed to help the new Formula One fan get up to speed on all of the terms, the slang, or whatever you want to call it, as they watch a Formula One race. So for this week, we figured we would discuss Formula One tires and why they matter. First trivia question for the group, though. Is tire spelled T-I-R-E-S or T-Y-R-E-S?
Depends if you're in England or if you're in America.
Very true. So here it's with an I, but I think, the Formula One world's with a Y. So that's the first trivia question about Formula One tires. So, Sten, give us the rundown. Explain Formula One tires a little bit. We've got soft, hard, C1, C5. What does it all mean, and why does it matter?
There's 7 compounds. There's 5 dry compounds, ranging from C1 to C5, and then there's your intermediate tire, which are the green walls, which are for some rain, and then there's your extreme tires, which are the blue walls, which are super tready for a lot of rain. And really, so the FIA and Pirelli come together and they pick out what set of 3 consecutive tires they choose to race on the track, depending on abrasion, surface, whatever. So some of the faster, more abrasive tracks will get the harder compounds, where some of the slower, tighter turned and more grippy tracks like Monaco are going to get your softer tires. And the easiest way for me to remember the difference in the tire, from C1 to C5, 5 looks like an S, which is the softest. So you can always, when they're they're bringing the C2, C3, and C4, okay, whatever's closest to 5 is the softest. So theoretically, that should be your fastest 1-lap pace tire, as opposed to your harder tires, your 1s, 2s, or 3s, depending on what race you're in, which are the more durable, just a harder compound. So it doesn't get as much heat. It doesn't warm up as fast. It doesn't wear down as fast. So it's not as quick ever, but it'll go, 2-3 times as long as a soft tire.
And I think, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know how many years ago it was, but they had sort of the super soft and extra soft. That was 8 years ago. So there was 5 different color wheeled walls. And so I think, correct me if I'm wrong, or 2018, so not that long ago, is that they basically still have those same 5 compounds. They just simplified the soft, hard, medium, and only had 3 of them per race to make it easier on the fans to understand what the heck was going on, right? Getting a lot of head nods there, so that's good. So basically, to Sten's point, the C5 is what used to be known as the super soft. But
Hyper?
now, it was a hypersoft?
I think it was hyper. It was
softest?
the light pink, and then it was super soft, medium, hard.
Okay. Yeah, so, 4 or 5 years ago, you had the hypersoft, which is now the soft, depending on which track it goes to. So one interesting part about sort of the 5 sort of slick compounds is that one weekend the C3 could be the soft, and another weekend the C3 could be the hard. So it just depends, to your point, Sten, on the track itself.
I think it's cool when you have those like repeat tracks, like when they did Austria 2 weekends in a row, they did Silverstone 2 weekends in a row. They tried to kind of negotiate what kind of tires they would bring. I know that they have to allocate them weeks and weeks and months in advance, but they, to your point, like the C3 might be your hardest compound at a Monaco, but it might be your fastest, softest compound at a Silverstone. And I think it was cool that they tried to kind of juggle that a little bit and bring in two different types of ranges. Like I think they brought like the 1, 2, 3, and then the 2, 3, 4. I think it would be amazing as a fan to say like, hey, we'll bring in a 5, a 3, and a 2, or like a 4, a 3, and a 1, and see what the teams can do with it, just to give that much more variance in the what the teams like strategies could be.
So Matt, I know you're a huge fan of the hard tires, especially in F1 2022. Tell us a
Yeah,
little bit about that.
they're my favorite compound. They are my car. The reason for that is because it brings my car and the wall just closer together. It just keeps that relationship going, and so the hards are near and dear to my heart because of that, and I just a very big fan of them.
That sort of leads me into my next question. You hear a lot about tire temp, right? And so it takes a little bit longer to heat up a harder tire versus a softer tire in theory. Sten or Cole, why is that?
I'm gonna let Sten break that one down for you.
So it's just the compound, it's the chemical makeup of the tire. So if the tire isn't as sticky, it doesn't create as much abrasion. So when the tire drives over the asphalt, the tire kind of like melts into the asphalt a little bit. And the softer that compound, the softer the chemical makeup of it, the easier it is to get more temperature because there's more friction. Again, I'm no scientist, but it's all about the friction and the compound of it.
And I know Mercedes in particular has had it seems like a more difficult time this year warming their tires, especially in qualifying. And why that is, we don't exactly know, nor do we need to break that down. But one thing, overall with tire strategy that's changed this year, and I'm curious of all y'all's opinion on this, is qualifying's changed a little bit, right? So up until this year, the tire that you qualified on in Q2 was the actual physical tire that you had to start the race on, which I always thought was a little interesting. Personal opinion is I feel like in qualifying, you should try to get the fastest lap possible. And in order to do that in pretty much every track, you need to put the soft tires on. So I always felt it was a little bit odd that even though in Q3, the drivers put on soft tires, but in Q2, they qualified on mediums, that they started the race on mediums. So this year, they've gone away with all of that. So basically, you have soft tires throughout all of qualifying. So Cole, just curious of your opinion. Do you think that's been the right move and changed up qualifying a little bit, or do you like how it was before
Well, I
this
like
year?
how it was. I think that was fun, but I do think I like to say good for the sport. I think it's better for the sport that everyone's running softs and it's full out. You saw a lot of times last year or the few years that they were real cautious in Q2, and if they had a lockup, that whole set is toast because they flat spotted a tire anywhere on it. So I like seeing the softs for everybody.
Yeah, I think I do too. I think, to me, the spirit of qualifying is the fastest single lap that you can do. And it felt like that Q2 wasn't the single lap fastest, or the fastest single lap that they could do when they were on mediums. Now, sure, maybe it was the fastest they could go on mediums, but then you had a lot of teams that weren't as fast throwing on softs just to make it into Q3, right? So then theoretically, they might have had a disadvantage with race strategy going into the race. So I personally am a fan of the way that they've changed it up. I also think what it's created is more randomness in terms of the starting tire for the race. We kind of don't know until they take the blankets off, on the starting grid in the morning. So I do think that's been a good change. Matt, I don't know if you agree or disagree.
Yeah, I mean, I like the fact that they can essentially put on whatever they want to put on at the start of the race. And it's 1 through 20, whoever had the fastest lap throughout qualifying. And then at that point, they can make the decision on their strategy. So before, you had teams essentially picking their starting tire in Q2 and then having no idea where they're starting on the grid on Sunday. And so I think it brings a more fairness to the sport, and better for the sport, because it gives teams it allows them to prepare fully instead of partially, on a Saturday.
I also think it allows them to sort of take into consideration sort of the variables that go into race day. The weather could change, so maybe a tire is better on Sunday than it would have been on Saturday. So they can at least decide that overnight going into the race on Sunday, what direction they want to go to. And I can't remember the race it was, but recently you kind of had maybe 3 or 4 of the top 10 on soft and the rest on mediums. And that just makes it interesting where they're not all on the same tire. So I like that variability a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it just gives the teams, you're making a decision when you have 100% of the info instead of 90% or 80%, like you were doing before. And I don't know in sports or really anywhere it's good practice to be, you always want to be able to make that decision when you know everything, not when you partially know what's going on.
Yeah. And another thing, to simplify sort of why tires are important. Obviously, there's different compounds, which the softs are faster, but they don't last as long. Hards are slower, but they last longer. Then tell us a little bit about sort of the allocation and what each team has to do per race in terms of 2 different sets of tires.
So in a dry race, you have to use 2 different color compounds. So you have to use a soft and a medium, or a soft and a hard, whatever combination. You have to use 2 of those different color sets. On a wet race, you could use just one set of. You don't even have to really pit on a wet race. Surprisingly, they usually do, because you'll see last year there was like the kind of interslicks, right? Is that what they were calling them? Where like you had worn down the tread so much on the intermediates that they were trying to kind of running like a slick tire. Um, but yeah, the teams have certain allocations that they're given. I could pull it up, but it's something to the example of like 2 sets of hards, 3 sets of mediums, I think, and then probably like 7 or 8 sets of softs. And that's not just for the race, that's for practice, that's for qualifying and your race. So at each of the different practice sessions, you have to turn some of the tires back in for analysis. You then get them back, you can keep them. So you'll hear, and the announcer say like, oh, that was a new pair of mediums, or that was a scrubbed pair or scrubbed set. That just means that they had a couple install laps, or they were run lightly to get temperature, or to just check out the tire compound. And we can get into it if you want, but like it's interesting that I think it's Aston Martin has never started the race this year on a new set of tires. They have been doing install laps on every set of tires, because the regulations change where they can't heat them up in the tire blankets to 100 degrees Celsius all the time. They're limited to like 80 degrees, and I think it's going to only drop off to be no tire blankets in a few years. But they're trying to get a couple extra heat cycles into the core as well as into the rubber to try to like activate and help prolong things. But we could all agree that whatever Aston Martin's doing is not working. So maybe they have data, they just can't, make it happen.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. If they're the only one that's been doing that, they're in P9, the constructor, so it hasn't exactly panned out well for them. And you hit on it a little bit. I think looking forward, one of the things that is rumored to change, and maybe it's official, is that eventually they'll do away with tire blankets. So that's going to come down to a little bit more driver tire management, right? There's going to be a little bit more extra layer of skill involved to deal with that, because they'll literally be on, whatever room temperature tires, which is super cold in the world of F1 tires.
And it's interesting, the whole like, so you touched on it earlier about Mercedes having really bad tire warm up. So something that I don't know if we covered it when we chatted about Monza, but like how Max came out with a bigger rear wing. And there was a concern that like, oh, you have a bigger rear wing, you're not going to be able to go as fast in the straights. But what that did is because he had more downforce through the turns, he had better traction, which was less sliding and less abrasion, which let him have better tire wear. So while his tires were wearing hotter in a straight line because there was more like force to squat the car down, so it was creating more temperature in straight lines, the tires were in better working ranges around the turns, which is kind of what that strategy worked out for him, where he just had way better tire wear because, again, the good, aerodynamics on that Red Bull car was activating the tire the right way when a Mercedes just has a lot of just not clean, great downforce. So they're getting temperature, but they're not getting it in the right way. And it's taking a couple laps right now. And I don't know if that's like the no side pod, design they have. Is it just a bad floor? And, I don't think they know either after millions and millions and millions of dollars of redesigning a new car.
That's super fascinating. One last sort of quick curiosity question, and Nicole, I feel like you may know this from the NASCAR days. Why is it? What makes it a slick tire? Is it the fact that it's basically bald with no
There's no
whatever you
tread, so
call it?
the more rubber that you
Yeah,
can
tread.
put on the asphalt, the more grip you're going to have. So solid rubber tires are going to give you maximum traction, but you put any water on the track at all, and that water's got nowhere to go. So the slick tire does not dissipate water whatsoever. So you will spin out like Lando kind of saw in Russia a couple years ago. You cannot take a slick tire in the rain. So a handful of years ago, I don't remember what year it was, at F1 changed. They used to have tires with tread in them as their normal tires, but they did away with that a handful of years ago, and they've been all slicks, and it's better traction, better speed.
Yeah, that was my follow-up trivia question. What year was the slick tire introduced in Formula One? Bonus points if you know the manufacturer.
I would guess 2012 Bridgestone.
No and no. Way older.
I was going to guess like 2010 at the new start of that new regime. I think Braun had the treaded tires in 09, didn't they?
Yeah, so I don't know if this, maybe I asked it the wrong way. So not like that they introduced it and used it for every race. Just when was the first time they put a slick on a Formula One car? So much older, much older.
Yeah,
Not just like became
I
the
would probably
standard,
guess
right?
the 60s, but it's probably older than that.
Yeah, 1964.
Okay.
Close.
I would say late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah, so 1971, slick tires were introduced in a Formula One car for the first time at the Spanish Grand Prix, and the manufacturer was Goodyear.
Goodyear.
Yeah, I was reading a little bit about this earlier. I think it was kind of Goodyear, Michelin. I think at one point there was multiple tire manufacturers in the sport, whereas today it's just Pirelli.
There was a funny post today. Charles posted a picture of him in a hyperbaric chamber with his gloves on, and he's taking his body temperature down to minimal. And Lewis responded to Charles's picture and said, "How cold is it there?" And Charles responded to Lewis with, "As cold as the hard tires in Barcelona." And I thought that was a perfect example of how terrible Barcelona practice was for them. A great example of how cold those tires were.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, but it was interesting to read a little bit about that, the history of Goodyear and Michelin. And they went back and forth, and all of a sudden Pirelli, I can't remember the year Pirelli became full-time. It's been in the last 10 years, I think. But yeah, Pirelli is your exclusive tire manufacturer in Formula One today. So with that, we'll wrap up sort of the 101 part of the episode. Hope that was helpful. Hope that was insightful. Tires are obviously an incredibly important part of Formula One and race weekends. And now hopefully you know a little bit about what C1, C2, C5, soft, medium, hards, intermediates, wets, and all that fun stuff. So let's talk a little bit of the news of the week. Cole, I know you've been following sort of the driver market maybe as close as any of us. You got anything new on Herta and his sort of pursuit of being a Formula One driver?
It's disappointing for him. He only has 32. So you need to have a super license, so many super license points to qualify to run in Formula One. He only has 32 points on his license, and he needs 40 to qualify. Red Bull has been doing all they can to bend the rules, get in favors, get in test drives to try to get Colton up to par on points so he could potentially slide into the AlphaTauri seat. That sounds like that was not going to happen no matter how hard they try. So the American Colton Herta is going to have to wait a little bit longer. I don't understand why he doesn't qualify. I feel like if you have 8 wins in Indy, that you should absolutely qualify to have a Formula One super license. But unfortunately not for Colton. So he's going to have to probably wait another season or so. But the rumor then floated that Nick DeVries would be taking that Alpine or the AlphaTauri seat. Not confirmed yet, but it looks like all signs are pointing to De Vries going to Tauri and Pierre going to Alpine. Still no clue about Haas. Gunther said yesterday that Mick had a 50-50 shot of keeping that seat, which means nothing. It sounds like Ferrari had talks with Mick as well of what his future was going to hold. I'm on the fence that Mick is not going to have a Haas seat next year, but I don't know. I hope that he does. I hope that name stays in the sport, but I'm not sure if Mick's going to get a fair shake or not. But yes, lots happening in the driver market. I could spend a whole podcast talking about all the drama, but can't wait for some hopefully announcements of driver seats in the coming weeks as the season kind of winds down.
Yeah, a couple quick questions, and Matt, I don't know if you can expand on this, but how do you get super license points? Is it just like being an FP1 practice driver, like just being in the seat? Is it test drives? Like, how do you actually get it?
So, I mean, the super license points you can get in about 40 different series. And it's all based off, it's not really about how many wins you have, or I think you can get points in some practices, but it's mainly the major points are from where you actually finish in those series in the championship race. So, for instance, like from the American standpoint for NASCAR, the NASCAR Cup Series, if you finish first in NASCAR, you get 15 super license points. If you finish second, you get 12. But if you finish first in Formula 2, you get 40 automatically. So if you spend one season in Formula 2 and you win it, you get your 40 points. But I mean, it goes from all things from Formula 2 to the IndyCar series, and even the FIA karting Continental Championships at the junior level. If you win that, you get 2 points. So Herta's got 32, and I think Jordan, you can maybe say that weren't they trying to get him into another series between now and the start of F1, that if he would have finished in the top 2 or 3, it would have gotten him those 8 points, I believe.
Correct. They tried to get him to run in a DTM race, and they've also tried to get him in FP1 practices at a couple different teams just to try to push him over the edge, but it doesn't sound like it's going to happen.
Yeah, and I think to his credit, I know I saw a quote going around the last couple of days that he said he does not want to be an exception. So he doesn't want, whether it's Red Bull or whoever fighting for him, to appeal to the FIA and make sort of a special circumstance for him. So, for me, credit to him. I'm sure he wants, if he's interested in Formula One, I'm sure he would take it, but not, he doesn't want a shortcut. He wants to earn it. So, whether it's this, winter series or, another year somewhere else. But that's interesting info. Matt, I didn't think about that. Obviously, one of the greatest NASCAR drivers of all time, Jimmy Johnson, went over to IndyCar, and I would assume since he's won 6 NASCAR championships that he had enough super license points to get behind an IndyCar. So I didn't realize that that's how they did that. That's cool. Cole, one other thing you touched on. So Nick DeVries is obviously a hot commodity. I think even more so after his performance filling in for Alex Albon in Monza. But he was also part of an Alpine driver test, I believe, yesterday, as we record this podcast on the 20th of September. And he was a part of a driver test. It was a private driver test that Alpine ran with 3 drivers at the Hungaroring this week. And it's believed that Formula E champion Nick DeVries was there, ex-Alfa Romeo driver Antonio Giovinazzi, as well as Alpine Academy driver Jack Doohan will get time behind the wheel. So we don't know any outcome of that yet, but I know, Cole, you think that you're leaning sort of AlphaTauri for the seat for Nick DeVries, but Alpine may be trying to swoop in and get their man there too.
I think that AlphaTauri is working the angle. If you want Pierre Gasly, we need Nick DeVries to get seat time. That's my assumption of what I would. I don't see any chance that Nick DeVries is going to Alpine. I think he's just testing the seat so Pierre can make that move as well.
And nothing against Nick, but imagine going as Alpine, going from Fernando and then losing him and then losing Oski P, then potentially Pierre Gasly, and now you're settling on a first year F1 driver who's got talent, but that's a far fall from what you were kind of expecting to have next year.
I think the Alpine seat is the most fascinating seat on the grid to be filled still. It's the highest car, the highest constructor that has a seat available. We all have been talking for well over a year that we hope Pierre gets that shot, but I'm still not sure if I think taking a shot on Nick is a good idea. He obviously can prove himself that he's a great driver, but you're not going to build a team around a 27-year-old. You're just not. I'd rather have somebody young that I can build around. Pierre has run his course at AlphaTauri. Absolutely time for him to move on, but I'd be looking for one of the Red Bull, the young drivers, Liam Lawson. They have a couple F2 drivers that are pretty spectacular. So I can't wait to see what Alpine does.
Yeah, Jack Doohan's only 19. He's currently 4th in Formula 2. So, if he's that, and maybe, I'm sure he's not, but maybe he is. No fault to him. I don't know if he's the generational talent like Max was at that age, but to your point, Cole, if you want to build around a young, maybe superstar, 19 is a pretty good age to do that.
How you mentioned you don't want to build a team around a 27-year-old. How long has Pierre been in F1? 6 years now.
102 GPs or 103 GPs.
Yeah, he's younger than Nick, so that says a lot.
I'd love to look this up, but I wish I'd done this beforehand. Maybe someone can look it up while we're chatting. What's the oldest age to win your first F1 race? Like, is it 28, like Nick DeVries, 27, or is it like 34?
Old school, I was going to say 30s. We'll see what they say.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to think about how old the drivers were back then, in the original 50s and 60s.
I mean, Nick is older than the average age of a guy that starts in his first Grand Prix, gets his first points, gets his first win, and gets his first championship. He's older than the average for all of those. And most of the people that start in F1 at 27 or older only race on average about 25 Grand Prix in their career. There's only like 10 guys that started in F1 that were older than Nick did when he started, last race. So there's not many people that are going to beat where he's at.
Yeah, I think if we ran the numbers real fast, the average age on the grid right now is probably 25, and that's throwing out Seb. He's the outlier at 60 something years old, so he's gonna skew that a little higher. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd just be curious why, and just because he's 27, 28 doesn't mean he can't be successful. Obviously, he did great in his one and only F1 start. I guess I'm just curious as to why did it take him this long. I guess in an ideal world, I mean, if you think if Max stays with Red Bull for the rest of his career, he's got 10 or 15 years left. I mean, he should maybe break every record because he started so young, right?
I found an article that talks about the oldest first time winners. It's specifically around Ferrari and Ferrari winners. So Charles is the youngest Ferrari winner at 21 years and however many months and days. The oldest Ferrari winner was Piero Taruffi. Sorry to the hardcore F1 fans. He was 45, 07, 06. So 45 years, 7 months, and 6 days. And 52. The oldest first-time winner for Ferrari that's kind of more modern, Eddie Irvine, 1999. He was 33 years.
right, so Nick's got a little runway to break that record if he gets into Def 1. But yeah, I think there's something like 5 seats that you could call unconfirmed maybe for next year, maybe a couple more. There's probably about 9 drivers vying to fill those seats. It seems like Nick DeVries is for sure going to have a seat somewhere, whether that's AlphaTauri, Williams, Alpine. Hopefully we get some resolution here over the next couple of weeks. But yeah, a little bit of musical chairs, and who knows, he might be that first domino that once that thing settles wherever he lands, if it is AlphaTauri, then that means Pierre's got to move, and Pierre goes to Alpine, and that just the dominoes fall where they may. So Cole, I know that's you love that driver market, so we'll stay tuned to all the breaking news that happens there. The other piece of news I want to discuss that came out yesterday, was the official announcement of the 2024 race calendar. I think 2, maybe 3 quick sort of high level news pieces are: it's a 24 race schedule, which is the most ever. Monaco is confirmed to be on the schedule this year, next year, and in 2025. And I know we already confirmed this, but Spa is also on the calendar for next year. It's moved. It's before summer break as opposed to after. But curious if anyone has any quick thoughts on the 2024 race schedule that came out for next year.
I love it for us. I hate it for the teams and their that's a lot, and especially the way that they've laid out the travel it just seems like they go back and forth across the pond a lot. When it seems to be they could probably manage it better. But for fans, you could have 40 races and we'd be excited. I'm glad they kept the historic tracks. I'm glad we kept Monza. I'm glad we kept Belgium. I'm glad that Monaco signed on for longer. We obviously get 3 American races next year: Miami, Austin, and the first Las Vegas, which hopefully we can all get to go to. But the more tracks, the better, especially in America.
It looks like there's only one triple header. I think, as I'm like skimming through this, and it looks like it's US, Austin, Mexico, Brazil, end of October, November. I might be overlooking one of them, but it looks like there's a lot of like 2 on, 1 off, 2 on, 1 off. I think it's fascinating the setup, infrastructure that they have, where they're shipping out a different set of paddock and whatever container on a boat to Bahrain, and then while they're also shipping another one out to go to like Baku, and then they're having to reroute it all. I mean, the logistics of these teams is unbelievable.
Yeah, I would love to have like a logistics manager for one of these teams and just talk to them about how the hell do you guys do all this? I mean, looking at next year's schedule, I think, Sten, you pointed this out. It looks like there's 5 races out of 6 weekends to end the season. And it goes Qatar, USA, Mexico, Brazil, Las Vegas, Abu Dhabi. Like, it's not like it's going from Atlanta to Miami where you can just drive a truck like they do in NASCAR, right? I mean, it's wild to me. I think I saw one of the posts going around that it's like 180,000 traveled miles for the teams next year, all over the world, which is cool from a fan's perspective, but just crazy to me how they can actually pull that off.
Yeah, Seb has got to be. He's going to voice his opinion about how many miles are traveling, and he's real upset about the flyovers. I saw that the other day. So I expect Green Thumb Seb to have something to say about the schedule. So luckily for Brady, he won't be in the lineup next year. So maybe we'll get less Seb hate next season, but I doubt it.
It's interesting too that they're pushing so hard to do like zero emissions in the next handful of years, and they're trying to do all of these energy efficient things. And you can't heat the tires up that much because it's a waste of energy. But you're adding another like trip onto it. You're doing all of the offsetting of what the cars are saving on the track, just getting everything logistically there on cargo boats and whatever else.
Another trivia question: do you guys know why they're doing 24 races next year?
Money.
Because Christian Horner said it was the max they'd be able to do.
It was a trick question, just because it's money.
It's got to be money.
Yeah,
no other reason.
It's definitely money.
Cash is king.
A lot of the tracks look really familiar, cool. Like Saudi Arabia is going to be around all the time now. Miami's going to be around. It looks like they brought back Imola, which was retired for a while, but they're bringing back Qatar. Like, isn't Qatar like a MotoGP track that they just repurposed for Formula One? It's not
Yeah.
good racing. At least it wasn't in the old
But
regulations.
you got to think big picture with Liberty Media, and it's that oil money. Like Bahrain is signed on for like 2035 or 2070, or it's something they have like a long-term ridiculous contract. So the Middle East, that oil money, I don't know why they don't hit all of those tracks right around each other at the same time. But I mean, look how many tracks they go to.
I just thought about this now, thinking about this because you mentioned Bahrain, Cole. But would we want them to bring back like Bahrain short or like the other? What they went reverse? They did the alternate route.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd love to see some of that.
Yeah,
The Secure Grand
I
Prix. That's
think
right.
there's a few tracks I don't. It's not in front of me. I don't remember seeing Portugal being on the race or the calendar for next year, which would be a shame because I do love
Correct,
that
yep.
track. So it does seem like they'll probably rotate a few through, but all the main the historic tracks, it looks like everything pretty much sticks around, and we just get a few more. But I agree with you, Austin. That's a MotoGP track. It did not make for great racing last season. I don't know how long of a contract they signed. I do believe it's multi-year there, but that's the one track I'm not super looking forward to for next season.
The best thing that came out of that race, other than Alonso starting, I think front row, second or third, and defending against Max, was when Bottas's car kind of blew up in front of Alonso, and all of the gifs that came out afterwards that Alonso was like driving through warp speed because all of the sparks that were just engulfing his vehicle. But yeah, I mean, Qatar was super boring.
Yeah, we've talked about this a little bit. I'd be curious to maybe poll our followers. And maybe I did. I think if you had to pick one that's going to go, is it Spa or Monaco? I don't know. I'm going to lean Monaco. I know there's a lot of talk for maybe 2025, 2026 that South Africa is going to get a race, and that might be what moves Belgium off the calendar, at least for the off and on type of a schedule. It sounds like that track in South Africa won't be complete until 2025, which is why Spa is staying on the calendar for next year. So I'm all for newer tracks. I mean, I think, for us here in America, you had Miami this year was the first time track. You could argue, was it an entertaining race? Maybe. Vegas will be fascinating just because one of the other things that's sort of, I guess, a highlight in the news is that the Vegas race is going to be on Saturday, which will be the fourth time in Formula One history that they've actually raced on a Saturday and not a Sunday. But under the lights, I think, Cole, you said it's maybe an 11 p.m. start time, which would be unbelievable. Hope that we're there, but
I want to say it's a 1 a.m. Eastern time start. I think I read that earlier today, which is great if you're out in Vegas, right? Because I think it's a 10 or 11 start. But yeah, if you're on the East Coast, it's like watching Japan. It's like watching Suzuka.
Yeah, there'll be a lot of
It's
beers
interesting.
flowing.
You've got the British crew waking up like the mountain time zone does, right? Like they're waking up at 7 a.m. to watch the race. I remember, I just know that like, oh, it's 9 a.m. on Sunday, time to, get moving because the race is coming on. Like they kind of have it, backwards this time. So it'll be cool.
That's actually kind of one of my favorite things about Formula One is that the races are at like 8 or 9 a.m. where I live, even earlier for you, Cole. When we have Austin coming up in a month, it'll be at like 3 p.m. We've got NFL football here. There's so many, like my kids are wanting to do things, just it's so much easier to watch when you got an 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock.
I'm a morning riser. I like the early. The earlier, the better for me for the races. No kids are awake yet, right? You can get your coffee, you get multiple screens happening. I don't love the American races because it does mess up my timing. Because we have football to watch. There's all kinds of things happening, but an 11 p.m. start for Vegas, I think, is perfect for Vegas.
Yeah, I can only imagine Vegas next November. It's a football weekend, so people will already be there. Sports betting or what have you. Maybe Formula One gambling with our friends at Grid Rival, right? But you've got football all weekend, then you've got Formula One all weekend. That place is going to be nuts. So we might have to get an RV, make our way there with a few pop-up chairs, and just find somewhere to watch the race because that's going to be unbelievable.
They're still not accepting reservations just for the race. If you're looking to make reservations in Vegas yet for the race, don't bother. They'll tell you don't call. You got to wait a little bit longer.
We might need to reach out to Ross and see if he's got any hookups for us. But we'll figure that. It's right before my birthday. Just saying, guys. Yeah, exciting. We did poll on Instagram our followers and just asked them. Basically, is 24 too many? I feel like a lot of the responses we got felt like it was just right. I mean, obviously, for us, the Formula One fan, the more racing, the better. We obviously understand the task that the teams have to go through in order to make that happen, and it's quite the undertaking for sure. One of the responses was, I want to race every weekend except Thanksgiving and Christmas, so he would go for 50 races. I'm not sure the athletes, the human beings behind the car, could survive that. But yeah, the more racing, the better, and hopefully it's an exciting, entertaining season like 2021 versus 2022. So with that, I'll segue with one last thing for you, Sten. Do you know when Max Verstappen's birthday is? I'm gonna be.
It's like last week or this week, isn't it?
So it's next week. It's on September 30th, which is the start of the Singapore Grand Prix. So I know, Sten, I don't know if you know the math off the top of your head, but looking ahead quickly to Singapore, Max does have an opportunity to win the championship at the race next week. So that would be a little birthday surprise if he's able to get enough points to win the championship on his birthday weekend.
What is it? Charles has to be below 8th and Sergio has to be below 5th? Vice versa. Something like that.
I think that's right, because Checo's P2 right now, I think, right? Good look. Yeah, I thought that was...
He would be third. They were tied going into Monza. Checo got 5th. So yeah,
you're right,
Charles would have to finish further back. Checo less than 5, Charles less than 8th.
Yeah, so I just thought that was cool that he might have an opportunity to win his second. Yes, I said it's Austin. His second title on his birthday weekend. Or if not, it'll probably for sure happen in Japan the following week. Last trivia question. I think we all know this. We've kind of had a mini summer break the last 3 weeks, or these 3 weeks. And I didn't really realize this until maybe a day or two ago as the reasons to why. And if you want to check out our TikTok, it's because we were supposed to have the Russian Grand Prix this weekend. So T's and P's, thoughts and prayers to our not necessarily friend Nikita Mazepin. I know he was in the news recently because the Russian GP was supposed to happen. Whether or not he would denounce his Russian citizenship and all that fun stuff in order to get back into Formula One. And he basically said he wouldn't denounce, but he was willing to drive, which he said he was already doing, drive under sort of a benign flag or an uncontributed flag or something like that. But that's why we had the 3-week gap here between Monza and Singapore next week. So anything else you guys want to cover before we move on?
A little off topic, but something we covered a few podcasts ago. Porsche has bailed, or Red Bull has scrapped the Porsche deal. I don't have any great details about it. It just sounds like Red Bull will be attempting to build their own powertrains and engines for 2026, and Porsche will look to find another way into the sport. But that deal is supposedly dead in the water, which is kind of disappointing. I think we were all looking forward to Red Bull Porsche.
Yeah, Christian was actually interviewed this week about that. And he basically said that they were heading down a certain direction in terms of Red Bull wanting to build their own power unit, and felt like while they appreciate and they wanted to work with Porsche, that Porsche strategy didn't align with where Red Bull ultimately wanted to go. And Red Bull said, no, we're going down this path. You're either with us or you're not. And so they just said, thanks, but no thanks. So Christian was very amenable about it. He said it wasn't no hard feelings. He really hopes Porsche still gets in the sport. He thinks it'd be good for Formula One. But basically, and he even alluded to this in the interview, which was fascinating, that he's, I forget the name of the department that they have at Red Bull now, but Red Bull's like, we want everything to be in-house. We want our technical drawers, our engineers, our aero, our powertrain to sit next to each other in the same building and to create all of it. And just the efficiencies that they can do with that was interesting. He talked about the history with Renault and being a customer in the engine department, where basically Renault was like, here's your engine. Red Bull's like, no, we want it to look like this. And Renault was like, no, here's your engine. And one of the benefits they've had with Honda is that Honda was only making engines for Red Bull. So basically, Honda was like, "What do you want us to build? We will build it." And so that's sort of the philosophy that Red Bull is moving towards for 2026.
Isn't Honda still technically building it, but Red Bull is like assembling and managing it, and that should change next year? Wasn't there like 1 year of handoff with Red Bull powertrain as Honda?
There was supposed to be, but I believe I read somewhere that Honda is thinking of staying in Formula One with Red Bull. I don't know if that's official or confirmed, or I feel like I read that somewhere that they'd like to stay in, which I think then obviously pulls Porsche out. And again, fascinated to find out if Porsche lands on their feet somewhere in Formula One.
Yeah, Christian touched on that too. They asked the question about Honda, so it was super interesting to learn. Honda, when they originally decided to pull out of Formula One, is because sort of their sort of corporate mandate was all EV, so electric vehicles, electric engines. And so obviously Formula One isn't electric. And so now there may be a move in the future to the more sustainable sort of 50-50 type engine. And so Christian said that might be a way for Honda to remain in the sport somehow, where they can help provide some of those units. But I think my takeaway was no matter what, Red Bull is going down making their own in-house power unit. And so not only are they a chassis provider, but they will be a power unit provider in 2026, and all of that will be in-house. And it sounds like they're a force to be reckoned with for the foreseeable future.
Oracle and Walmart money. It's tough to beat.
And a double championship here sooner than later for the season. So yeah, we look forward to getting back on the track for the Singapore Grand Prix. We'll celebrate Max's birthday, and I'm sure Austin will get us a cake that we can all eat and celebrate Max's birthday. If not, I'll send him a cupcake. But yeah, wanted to get you all up to speed on the news that's going on in Formula One. Wanted to share another sort of 101 series episode with you all. Help you better understand the tires that are on the track in Formula One and what all that means. So as always, thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.